Welcome to the Bigger Cash Flow podcast, where we interview business owners and real estate investors that share tips and tricks on how to grow your cash flow and reach financial freedom.
Hello, everyone. This is Joe Kim with Bigger Cash Flow. Welcome to episode 2. We're continuing our intro series where we'll be interviewing the other half of the BCF podcast. Bo is a real estate investor based out of sunny Orange County, California. During the day, he works as a consultant for a CPA firm, and during his free time, he loves to network with other investors and work on growing his buy and hold rental portfolio. So can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so Joe, like you mentioned, I'm based out of Orange County, California, and I work as a consultant for a CPA firm, and I've been doing that for a little over 3 years. I've been in accounting for about 5 years. And, I recently got into real estate investing. It's been a little under a year. And ever since, I bit the real estate bug, I've been studying this. I've been networking with different investors and just growing my portfolio. So I'm super passionate about real estate. That's why, I've teamed up with you to do this podcast, because as I'm learning and I'm growing, I also kind of want to share this information to other people and just, do a value add and pay it forward. So yeah, very excited to talk about my journey and how I've gotten here, and how I can help our listeners do the same.
Great. So when you first got started, what was the tipping point? Because a lot of us, learn about real estate and then have this interest and desire to do something. But usually there's like this one tipping point or one event or one person that really got you started, the actual spark. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So there wasn't any big event, I like to say. Like, I still love my W-2 job. I love my career, the things that I'm doing day to day. So it wasn't like I wanted to retire from that anytime soon. But what happened was, about a year ago during Thanksgiving, I picked up this purple book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I've read it before, but this was my second time reading it. And the second time I read it, I feel like that's when the concepts really, I was able to grasp the concepts of assets versus liabilities and creating passive income, because I had bought a primary residence a couple months earlier, and I was actually renting out one of the rooms. And, the passive cash flow monthly coming from one of the rooms being rented out,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of sparked a, idea in me. It's like, hey, if I can continue to build this up, even at like $300, $400, $500, it's going to make a big difference. I'm kind of stacking my chips, and, $200, $300 would replace my, car payment, maybe my other insurance payments, things like that. And I'll be able to kind of keep on reinvesting my other net income, my residual income. So that kind of sparked my idea. And then I started, Googling. Google is your best friend, right?
Yeah.
I've been looking on Bigger Pockets. I've been looking at different real estate blogs like Invest for More. I've been reading a ton of articles and blogs about how other investors are doing it. And I attended a webinar hosted by Brandon Turner of Bigger Pockets. And it was the 90-day challenge, because no, it was actually the 45-day challenge, because it was about mid to end of November. And he was kind of breaking down, step by step of how you can get a rental property within the last 45 days of the year, and how you can use that to create passive income. So I was watching that, webinar, and then I decided to take massive action and talk to other investors on the forums, ask questions like, how can I do it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the key question that, was my takeaway from Rich Dad Poor Dad, just switching that mindset from, man, I can't do this to how can I do it? How can I afford this? So that
Right.
was the big kind of pivoting moment for me, which was like last Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more in details about that very first deal that you did? Well, it sounds like you started with house hacking, which
Yeah.
Brandon Turner, coined himself of basically renting out a room, renting out your primary residence while you're living there. But your first real deal outside of that, can you give us some details about how that went?
Yeah, for sure. So when I was listening to the webinar and then some of the other podcasts about real estate, I came across the concept of turnkey real estate properties. And basically, it's properties that you've mentioned in episode 1, where I as an investor and jumping into a property that has already been rehabbed, and it already has a tenant in place, and I buy the property literally turnkey. I turn the key and it's ready for me, right? So I was really excited to buy a turnkey property. That meant I didn't have to find a distressed property, a contractor, deal with the risks of the rehab, and then finding a qualified tenant. So in order to kind of narrow down my short list of turnkey providers, I reached out to other investors that are local to me, and I asked them, hey, who do you use? Who would you refer? And I had a short list of about 15 or so who I ended up calling. You know, because it's the Midwest, the time zone actually worked in my favor. So before work, every day at 6 a.m., I would start calling these turnkey providers in the Eastern time zone. So they're already up and running at 9 a.m. So
Mm,
I was able to interview them and kind of get a feel for who they are. And, a lot of the times in the beginning, these providers are going to tell you what you want to hear. But, you also have that gut feeling, the communication or lack thereof, you're going to be able to know, oh, maybe, I'm just not going to fit well with this person or this provider.
right.
So I narrowed down that list of 15 to about 4. And I ended up looking at the properties that they had currently in their inventory.
Hmm.
And I made sure that they were underwritten to my standards. And then I bought one.
Wow. So you had evaluated 15 turnkey providers.
Yeah.
And how did you narrow it down? Well, like what were some of the criteria that you used to find the right turnkey provider to
Yeah.
work with?
So I guess to take a step back, before I even started interviewing these turnkey providers, I kind of started at a high level of what markets do I want to operate in.
Mm,
And, I knew that those markets for me were going to be in the Midwest, where
yeah,
properties, the rent to value ratio is 1% or better. And also where, they're cash flowing, comparatively to our market in LA here, the rent to value is probably like zero point 0.3 to like zero point 0.5. And you're
right.
most likely going to be negative cash flow unless you have a hefty down payment. So I was looking at markets that had, good population growth. The economy was very diverse, not just dependent on one economy. And also, it had good, robust a real estate business. So I was able to find multiple turnkey providers, multiple property managers, multiple wholesalers and brokers.
Hmm.
I didn't want to be in the tertiary markets where there wasn't a lot of players because I didn't want to be dependent on one person. So,
Hmm.
if anything went wrong, I was able to, find another provider or another broker to just kind of help me out. So I found Kansas City, the Missouri side, as well as Indianapolis, Indiana, and Little Rock, Arkansas to kind of fit my standards. I
Right.
also looked at Memphis, Tennessee. It's a great rental market.
Right.
Um, so once I decided on those 4 markets, I created a short list of providers that are often seen on the forums or Facebook groups that I'm in or other investors. I'm all about, not recreating the wheel. And if people have found success doing it before me, I'd like to kind of start there and then kind of measure it according to my own standards.
Mm.
But, I didn't want to spend all the time, starting from scratch when I didn't really need to.
Right. So you started with that one property, and how many properties are you at right now?
So right now I'm at 7 rental properties, but I'm also in escrow for 2. So hopefully by this time next month, I'll have 9 properties. So I have 3 in Kansas City, 3 in Indianapolis, and 2 in Little Rock.
Right.
And I also have 2 duplexes.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you just started less than a year ago and you started with one, and now it sounds like you're at, 8, 9, almost going on 10, double digits soon. So that's fantastic. Now, somebody's got to, the our guest must be wondering, how do you buy 9 homes, in less than a year? And can you talk a little bit about the financing part of buying real estate? Because obviously, when you want to scale, the finances and getting the money is one of the big problems and solutions you need to solve.
So financing, I think that's a huge question that I had in my head when I was first starting out, because I had some money saved up. Because naturally, I feel like my wife and I were savers. We're pretty frugal in nature. But if you're doing turnkey properties and putting 20% down, let's just say on $100,000 property with closing costs, that's about 25K. You're only going to be able to do that so many times until you run
Yeah.
out of money, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of got
Wait, you
creative.
don't have any rich uncles or aunts to
Oh,
borrow money from?
not that I know of yet.
Yeah.
So I mean, I had to get creative and I read a lot of real estate books. And, it's funny, a lot of these real estate, quote unquote gurus have these flashy titles, how to buy properties with none of your own money or, $0 down or things like that. And I think those are, great methods to study upon. But I also want to caveat and say that it's none of your own money, but it's somebody's money, right?
Mm.
So whether
Yes.
you're borrowing it from a hard money lender or private lender, whether you're trying to do the Burr method and force that appreciation. So there's a lot of different ways you can get creative here. And I've pretty much done everything from borrowing from my 401k, stripping the equity from my primary residence via a HELOC, and
Mm.
also using private money. And that's, just funds from other investors that I've built a relationship with and they're investing in my deals. So, yeah, used various creative methods to grow my portfolio.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like you've tried a lot of different techniques, but I think one of the most important things that you kind of touch upon, which I think, is one of your greatest strengths, which is networking. Because how do you, while living in Southern California, how do you do all those different techniques in terms of, doing the Burr method, which, you need to find contractors, and you're doing private lending where you need to find private lenders to lend money to you. How important was it for you to, network and grow your network to be able to accomplish all the things that you did?
Yeah, I think networking was huge. Not only to find, other investors for private money lending, but also just for the mentality. Because, I truly believe it when other people say that, 80% of anyone's success is your mentality and your mindset. And, before I really got into growing my portfolio, I really focused on my mentality, my why. Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And that goes not only for real estate, but just for my W-2 job and, my relationships with my family and friends. I want to live life with a purpose. So I always ask myself, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Am I just doing it to please others? Am I doing it with a purpose? This is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And for networking, it really helped with getting the right mindset, because there's a lot of people who've come before me and they've gone through various struggles. They've lost money, they've made a lot of money and things like that. And just having the right mindset, I think, will help you overcome any fears, any doubts, and any troubles that might come your way through your real estate investing journey.
Mm.
So yeah, networking's been great. And I think, for a lot of people who are in the coastal markets of, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, a lot of these folks might be wishing that they lived in the Midwest, where, prices for these homes are much more affordable. But I would kind of encourage people to look at it from a different perspective, meaning there's a lot of other investors who are living on the coast. Um, Generally speaking, these people have, higher median income because of the cost of living than the
Right.
Midwest cities. So there might be a little bit more equity in these homes and more capital to want to invest in the Midwest cities. So,
Mm.
going to these REI meetups, I actually came across another investor who took down a 16 unit in San Antonio, and all she had to do was go to a couple meetups in Newport
Mm.
Beach, and she had a great deal. She knew it was a great deal. She has the experience. She just needed some private money, and she went to a couple of these meetups, and in 3 meetups she was funded. So
Wow.
I'm not sure if you can do that going into a bunch of REI meetups in the Midwest. There might be a
Mhm.
bunch of other people looking for money, right? Not any money providers. So I kind of approach it from that perspective. And then
Yeah.
I mentioned that I stripped the equity from my primary residence because one of the benefits of living in the coastal markets is that we see a lot more appreciation than the secondary and tertiary markets. And for me, equity, unless you're using it, it's just sitting there. You can't
Yeah.
eat it. So I was following the housing market comparables in my neighborhood, and I noticed that homes in my area, then when I bought it for, have gone up significantly, like 40 to 50,000 in one year.
Right.
So I was able to get a HELOC for about $40,000, $50,000,
Mm-hmm.
and then I used that to buy 2 more rental properties. And I think it was possible because I was living in LA and not the
Yeah.
Midwest. So I encourage investors who are always wishing that they lived in cheaper markets where they can invest in. There's pros and cons of living in different markets. If you're
Yeah.
living in a high cost of living area, but you have higher wages and your primary residence appreciates more, you just need to take that and invest it in somewhere that it makes sense.
Right, right. So can you talk a little bit about some of the big lessons that you've learned over this past year? It sounds like you've had a pretty big journey doing a lot of different deals. What are some like just things that stick out in your mind that is, let's say that you would tell your younger self that just started on their first deal, now that you're looking back? What big lessons would you share with us?
Yeah, off the top of my head, there's 2 things that come to mind. Number one is always trust your gut. So, I think I've mentioned this on your episode. I'm not sure, but I read this book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks
Hmm.
about how our split-second decision making, our gut, or our intuition, is sometimes much more accurate than when we take the time to analyze the deal and break it down and then make a more calculated decision. It's because we have that gut feeling whether this is right or wrong, right?
Hmm.
Um, so, there was that gut feeling that I got when I was trying to buy my first property. And, my gut was telling me, don't do the deal. And
Yeah.
At that point, I
Yeah.
just was fresh from the webinar and I was like, I need to take this property down and
Hmm.
I want to get one, before the end of the year or something like that. So I was just
Yeah.
kind of blinded by my goals. And, I just fell in love with the property. So that's another rule, right? Don't fall in love with the investment property.
Right.
Um, and there was a lot of signs. Number one, some of the rehab in the inspection report, it came back as, these things weren't done right.
Mm.
We were able to kind of negotiate and get some more repairs done and whatnot. Looking back at it, I should have either asked for a further price reduction or just walked away from the deal. But,
Mm.
I still wanted to take down the deal. So I ended up compromising from my own standards. And
Yeah.
number two, the lack of communication.
Hmm.
I was kind of not feeling good about the lack of communication. That was another red flag for me. But I was like, I hope once we close on this deal, things will get better.
Hmm.
But that was another mistake that I made on my part.
Yeah. Now, I think it's always hard to kind of balance that idea of you need to pull the trigger and
Hmm.
take action, while also at the same time, being, sticking to your principles, right? And your philosophy of investing, and not bending those rules, because bending those rules can get you into trouble. And I remember the exact same feeling that I had with my first deal myself, where the inspection report basically said the roof needs to be repaired now.
Yeah.
And I was like, it should be okay. I asked the turnkey provider to give me a discount. He did. And sure enough, 1 year later, I spent $6,000 on replacing the roof.
Yeah.
So on $100,000 house, right? That's a lot of capital expenditure to spend in, just in 1 year, after purchasing a property. So a lot of times that rehab is so important, because you don't want to end up paying for a lot of capital expenditures during that first or second year, because all those things should have been taken care of, when you buy a turnkey property.
Right.
Um, and can you talk a little bit about why you transitioned to the BRRRR method instead of sticking to turnkey?
Yeah. Great question. So, the BRRRR method, which stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat, is a method where you can essentially buy a distressed property for cents on the dollar, and then do some rehab, which forces the appreciation, and you then put a long-term note on it, and you cash out your money, and you repeat the process, right? So just to give you an example, a deal that I'm working on right now, and I'm going to just round up the number so it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm buying it for $50,000, putting about $15,000 to $20,000 worth of work. So that's $70,000 all in, and it
Mm-hmm.
should appraise for $100,000. So
Oh, wow.
I'm all in at 70 cents on the dollar. And what that will allow me to do is, once the rehab's complete, I'll take that property, go to a local bank and say, hey, I own this property that's worth $100,000 free and clear. Would you like to put some debt on it? And they're going to be like, yes, I would, because long
Mm-hmm.
term, that
Yeah.
bank is going to make multiples off of, my mortgage. So,
Right.
they're going to put a note on it for $75,000. So
Mm-hmm.
they want to put 75% loan to value. And then I'll take that $75,000 and pay off any of my debts, whether that be from a 401k loan or a HELOC, private lender, hard money lender. So the magic number, if you kind of want to break even with no money in the deal, is to make sure that you're all in, including holding costs, and financing costs and closing costs at 75 cents on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
That way, then, once you refi out and pay all your obligations, you don't have any money in the deal. So that's
Right.
kind of where this deal is also trending towards.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that said, the reason why I wanted to transition from a turnkey method to the BRRRR method is just that, as mentioned before, there's only so many deals that you can do for 20% down or 25% down for, 2 to 4 units on turnkey properties. So in this example, $100,000 property, then I would have needed to bring 20% down, which is $20,000, and closing costs, let's just round it up to 25K. So if I wanted to buy 4 properties, I need $100,000. Where
Right.
if I'm doing the BRRRR method, each time, if I'm buying it right, I'm right on the rehab and ARV, then essentially I wouldn't have a lot of money in the deal, if any. But there's caveats to this. There's a lot of risk that you're bearing as the investor,
Right.
because when you start rehabbing properties, that's on you. The risk is on you to make sure you get the scope correct,
Hmm.
making sure that you're handling the contractors, from the acquisition side to the rehab to the refinance. That's all up to you. Whereas the turnkey provider kind of handles all of that, and you come in at the last part and you just buy a rent ready property. So there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
I actually still bought a turnkey property recently. I think my 6th or 7th property was turnkey,
Hmm.
but I was able to get that discounted heavily because it wasn't a regional or national turnkey provider. It was kind of
Right.
like a flipper that operated in a certain area, and he was kind
Hmm.
of liquidating his portfolio. So I was able
Oh,
to pick
perfect.
one up for pretty cheap. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think, turnkeys serve a purpose, and BRRRRs obviously serves a purpose in terms of making sure that you're able to scale without a lot of money out of pocket.
Right. So that sounds amazing that you've done all these deals and um, just the tremendous amount of experience that you gained through all this stuff. Now, let me ask you, now that you've done a whole kind of, a good chunk of single family homes and can you actually, are most of your homes single family? Do you have multifamily? Um,
Yeah, so I have 2 duplexes in Indianapolis, and the
uh-huh,
rest of my
single family.
properties are single family. Yep.
Yeah. And so 2018 is coming to a close real fast.
hmm
What what's your plans for 2019 and beyond in terms of your real estate investing? Do you see yourself going in the same path, or do you see going in a slightly different path? What are your plans for the future?
hate to give out a cop out answer, but if you would have asked me a year ago,
Yeah,
if what would my real estate portfolio look like,
right.
this moment, I would have had no idea that I would have had, this many, and
Yeah.
the level of experience that I've gained just by doing, right? Because
Hmm.
you only learn so much from listening to other people
Right.
and reading books and things like that. I would say, 80% is on the job. It's,
Yeah,
learning
absolutely.
by doing.
Right.
So to answer your question, I'm not sure because, I'm always learning and talking to other investors like yourself. And, one of the concepts that really intrigue me is Airbnb. And, I also have a lot of mentors who do multifamily. So I'm also always studying, reading up on that, going to boot camps,
Hmm.
networking with other investors. So it might take me there, but at this moment, I'm kind of focusing on what I feel like is working and what I like to do, which is, acquiring these distressed properties that need a little bit of cosmetic work and then borrowing them out so I don't have money in the deal. So
Right.
continue to do these until I hit my 10 Fannie Mae loans
Right.
under my name, and then maybe I'll get a couple under my wife's name.
Perfect.
Um, and then I don't know. In between there, we might get some Airbnb properties. I might partner up with you. Who knows?
So, a lot of our listeners may be just starting off in real estate. Can you give some advice to a newbie in terms of like what key things they should do, or words of wisdom that they can kind of hang their hat on?
Yeah, definitely. And you're probably going to hear this many, many times on other podcasts or books or, blog posts, but the simple fact is that you need to get started, right? I tell my story of my first rental property that I had a gut feeling and it didn't turn out to be the best property. Even right now, it's my worst performing property out of the other ones.
Mm,
But, on the flip side of that, that's the first property that has allowed me to continue to push forward and buy these other properties.
yeah.
Also, because I didn't know there was anything wrong with it until I've already taken down 4 properties. And then I was dealing with an
Yeah.
eviction and things like that. So,
Right.
at that point, I was like, I'm already in this and I'm just going to continue to push forward. Now I'm kind of staring slowly away from turnkeys, more into doing these value add type projects.
Right.
And if I would have just done one and just sat there, then I would have probably had a bad taste in my mouth from getting an
Yeah.
eviction on a turnkey property in month 4, right after the 90-day warranty has ended.
Right. Right.
So crazy timing, right? Right after
Yeah.
their guarantees and warranties are over, I'm dealing with
Yeah.
an eviction.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, I would just say, getting started is just so important. Like I mentioned before, there's only so much you can learn and retain from listening to audiobooks and podcasts and reading books and attending these meetups. You actually have to do the work.
Yeah.
I recently studied how to create an LLC. I went to, Clint Coons asset protection, 3-day seminars and things like that. But until I actually decided to, create the LLC, fill out all the paperwork and things like that, that's when I really learned more about, how these entities are structured, the tax benefits and things like that. When doing the BRRRRs, I talked to a wholesaler, reviewed distressed properties, prepared a scope of work, all these things. Until I did it, it doesn't really stick with you. So
Mhm.
my biggest advice is just go out there and take massive action.
All the successful investors basically have the same experience in terms of, pulling that trigger and taking massive action, and then also experiencing, the troubles and difficulties. But when you get knocked down, you just get right back up and you keep pushing forward. And I think that's the key to winning the game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's never going to be always smooth sailing. You're always going to have some, storms here and there throughout your career and your portfolio for sure. I want to get to one last question here. It just reminds me of the time that we had dinner just about, I don't know, was it 2 months ago, where
Mhm.
we met up and we had this great dinner, great rapport, first time face to face conversation. And I remember that long, so we ended dinner and we were walking to our cars, and then we started talking in that parking lot a little bit more, and then we popped this question to each other. I can't even remember which, if it was you or me who kind of like brought it up, but you and I decided to start this podcast together.
Mhm.
And can you talk a little bit about why you're so excited about this podcast and what motivated you to do this?
Yeah, for sure. As you were just recalling that meetup, I was just smiling because, I think it was just really nice to find another investor who I really resonate with in terms of, you know, whether it be the immigrant mentality, working really hard, and but realizing that, our traditional advice of going to school and, getting a good education, W-2 job and climbing up that corporate ladder, might not really apply in this day and age. And if you're really passionate about something, there's so many people out there who are just, like I said, again, living their life on purpose and just doing the things that they love and are passionate about and finding and creating success. And, when I met you and we were talking about real estate and how we were both passionate for it, you were so excited talking about your Airbnb deals and things like that. I knew that, I also had a story to share, and there were things that people started to ask me on these different real estate forums, or they would email me or Facebook message on how I did it. And I've only been in the game less than a year, right? So I'm still learning myself, but I realized, hey, there's still value in this, because there might be other gurus out there teaching this stuff, but their information might be 10, 15 years old. They might be further from the process from people who are just starting out. And for me, I feel like I have a fresh perspective. I'm just starting out. I'm learning. I'm continuing to grow. There's growing pains, but I just wanted to add value to our listeners and other people who might feel like they're stuck or they don't even know where to begin. And also going back to that immigrant mentality, where not only does it apply to the actual immigrants who come to this country for a better education, better life for their kids and their families, but for people with that mentality of just working hard every day and just trying to create a better future for themselves and their families. So I wanted to create this podcast with you, just to share that story and hopefully bring on other guests and other people who have had that success, so that we can share tips and tricks and really close that gap. It's because sometimes when you're reading books and you're listening to how other people did it, it feels so far away. And hopefully we can break down those barriers and kind of make it more step by step for people to collapse the gap.
What's the best way to get in contact with you, Bo?
Yeah, so people can hit me up via email, bo@biggercashflow.com. Or you can find me on Bigger Pockets forums, or you can go to our website at www.biggercashflow.com. I started, creating a little blog there so you can read about my real estate investing journey. I also talk about personal finance and other investing and some book reviews. So yeah, check it out.
Fantastic. Everyone check out Bo's website, biggercashflow.com. And I'm so excited for this road that we're on together with this podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Bo, for that interview. I really appreciate you sharing your real estate investing experience. And we're so excited to hear more about what you've been up to in the upcoming episodes. And stay tuned, guys, because we got a lot more stuff coming at you for the next 5 episodes. So the next 5 are going to include why real estate, getting started, importance of mindset, turnkey rentals, and my favorite, Airbnb. So look out for those 5 episodes that are coming up. That wraps up our show for this week. If you thought that was helpful, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you may be listening. We appreciate your support and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. Please remember that opinions of the guests are their own, and nothing on this show should be considered personal or professional advice. Please consult your tax, legal, or financial advisor for personal advice that fit your unique situation. See you next time.